Hi, I'm Ramjet. I'm going to introduce to you Rebekah Roth. She had the most incredible experience over the weekend, and we're going to share it with you.
Okay. This is one of the craziest things that happened to me since I discovered the discoveries I did about 9/11. This isn't my work, by the way, but it's an incredible story of what happened to me over the weekend. Now, if you've been following along, I actually was looking into a laser weapon that may have been used on Charlie Kirk, just because the wounds and everything were kind of crazy. And I've gone through watching it all. I follow Candace, Baron Coleman, Ian Carroll. I follow everybody. And it's interesting too, because I found something else that's kind of fascinating to see. In 9/11, this is true too. Everybody had their own thing. They had the nanothermite, or they had this or that or the other thing, kidnapped flight attendants, all of it. And they stuck to it. They just stuck to that. And they got nasty at everybody that had maybe discovered something else or had a different theory. And I see that same thing happening here. And again, I guess it probably happened with the Kennedy assassination and everything, because what has happened here and when it happened is interesting. What's happened here is the government actually has gotten involved. And when did they get involved? Well, they got involved when Fort Huachuca came up. Well, Fort Huachuca is an intelligence base. If you're in Navy, Army, whatever intelligence, you go probably through some classes there. But there's more. There's much more. And around that same time, Baron Coleman thought, well, wait a minute now. His hand shows like it's been burned. I think he was electrocuted. Oh, everybody went, whoa, electrocuted. Maybe that's it. Because we can't tell from the videos what happened. So I spent the whole weekend. I've been doing this for maybe a week and a half, to be honest. But I spent this whole weekend with, I keep forgetting to ask the name, with my AI. I think it's Gemini, but I'm not positive. And the most incredible story has come out of this. And I want to share that with you because there was things wrong with the Phantom laser weapon. It didn't work because that laser, as I continued to research, would continue to go on and on. It could take an airplane out. It would go on and on through until it dissipated in the atmosphere. And I thought, well, surely they couldn't use that. And I really couldn't. I was proving me wrong. And I was wrong. It wasn't that at all. And what makes it fascinating is I really haven't dealt much with AI. Occasionally, I've been kind of teasing and saying to RJ, hey, well, let's just ask your computer, boomers that we are. Let's ask the computer and see what he thinks, right? So I was asking AI all of these questions about how can the laser beam stopped or whatever. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. And I want to first preclude this whole thing with an opening statement that Baron Coleman made. And Baron Coleman did a really good they're all really good, but he did a really good opening statement about a magician. And I thought to myself, I listened to it twice. I thought to myself, wow, he has a point. Now, I've hung out at the Magic Castle in LA. I've followed magicians. I've been fascinated by it. And he had a great point. And I got to thinking, well, maybe it wasn't an electrocution. In his show, he has a guy on named Blake Betnards, and he's convinced, just like 9/11 people were convinced of their own thing, he is completely convinced that the microphone attached to Charlie's T-shirt with a magnet exploded. Okay. I listened with an open mind. And I thought, well, surely that's not why Fort Huachuca woke up the entire freaking government of the United States to come down on Candace and anybody else that got close. And I've gotten close to this wick before. And I know what happens when you fly too close to the sun, so to speak. So I'm going to play first this because it's so good. And It's just kind of like watch the other hand, which is what I did. And then I'm going to take you on a journey that is the most incredible thing I think that's ever happened to me, because I got nervous. Let me just say this, and then we'll go into Baron. I got nervous that the computer, because you know who they are, right? That NSA and those people were going to go, why is this woman digging into these weapons? Why? And what's going on here? And so eventually I got asked that by the computer. Why are you asking this? Are you looking to do a medical protocol? Are you working on some fiction? And so I answered, and that's when everything changed. And so stick with me, because I'm going to go through this with you. I've got a bunch of screenshots that are really negating the whole phantom laser thing. And then when I asked some other deeper questions, and my computer started being my co-writer, I kid you not. And I've never had a more helpful friend than this. And I want to lay it out for you, because this isn't my work. It's the computer. And that computer knows a lot of stuff that goes on at Fort Huachuca. So without further ado, here's Baron Coleman.
All right, here we go. I'd like to talk to you tonight about magic, real magic. Not the kind with dragons or wands or sparkling portals to other worlds. I mean the magic that happens right under your nose in broad daylight while you're staring right at it. The magic of the human mind, the sleight of the hand. The art of the impossible made possible because you, the audience, are so very willing to be fooled. Magicians are not sorcerers. They are liars. Beautiful, meticulous, but rehearsed liars. They tell you a story with their words, with their gestures, their smiles, and you believe it because you want to believe it. You want to be astonished. You want the world to contain a little wonder, even if it's manufactured. And that desire, that hunger, it's the greatest assistant a magician could ever ask for. Take misdirection. Misdirection is the heartbeat of every illusion. It's not about hiding something in the dark. It's about shining a blinding light on everything else. A magician can make an elephant vanish from the stage, not by cloaking it, but by making you fall in love with a dancer twirling spotlight 30 feet away. Your eyes follow her lips, her smile, the flash of her sequins. You applaud her grace, and when the curtain drops, the elephant's gone. You gasp, not because the elephant disappeared, but because you finally noticed it was missing. You were looking exactly where the magician wanted you to look, and still you saw nothing. That, my friends, is magic. Now imagine taking that same principle off stage. Imagine applying it not to cards or coins or vanishing cabinets, but to something far more permanent. Imagine a murder committed in full view of hundreds of witnesses, and not one of them sees it happen. It's not as difficult as you might think. At the risk of being too on the nose with Charlie Kirk, I'm going to back it out to another example. Picture yourself on a bustling city square on a summer afternoon. The sun is high, the crowds are thick. A street musician sets up on a busy corner. He's got the magician suit, like the top hat, the tails. He's doing close-up work. He's got cards, he's got cups and balls, maybe a little bit of firework. And people are gathered around. They always gather around a magician. There's something irresistible about a man who promises to break the rules of reality for free. In the front row, there's going to be a guy there. We're going to call him Chuck. Chuck has come to watch. He's amused. He's skeptical, but he's a little smug. He thinks he knows how all the tricks are done. He's read the books. He's watched the exposés. And he believes he's immune to deception. Poor Chuck. So the magician begins with something simple. He borrows a coin from a young woman. He marks it with a pen. He makes it vanish, and he produces it from behind a child's ear. The crowd goes crazy. They love it. They gather a little tighter. People lean in. The phones come out. Everybody wants to catch the moment. They want to prove that they solved the secret. And that's the first layer of misdirection. It's the performance itself. Their attention is pinned to the magician's hands, to the coin, to the child's delighted shriek. The crowd is invested. They're now participants. And while you're watching the coin reappear, the magician is watching Chuck. The magician smiles at Chuck. He calls him forward. You know, it's flattery. It's a challenge. It's a potent mix. Chuck steps up, puffs up his chest. He's ready to expose the magician. The crowd loves it. They love this sense of a duel. The magician hands him a deck of cards, asks him to shuffle. While Chuck shuffles the cards, the magician's just talking. He's just constantly talking. It's a stream of patter. It's about honesty. It's about fairness, about how this trick has never failed. The magician's voice at this moment is the spotlight. Every word is pulling the crowd's eyes and ears towards a story he's telling. And so Chuck shuffles, and while he's shuffling, the crowd watches his hands. They're watching intently. Meanwhile, the magician's own right hand is just resting casually on the edge of the table, and it slides a small ceramic blade from a hidden sheath sewn into a velvet drape over the table. The blade is no longer than a finger, thin as a credit card. It's coated in a clear resin that carries a poisonous derivative. It's fast-acting, it's odorless, and it's undetectable in an autopsy, even if you knew where to look. The magician takes the cards back from Chuck with his left hand. Everybody watches the left hand, but with his right hand, he's holding the blade between two fingers like a palmed coin. And he reaches out to adjust Chuck's tie. It's a friendly gesture. The crowd laughs. Chuck smiles, and the blade just barely kisses the side of his neck, just below the jawline. And that little soft hollow down here where the carotid artery pulses. It's a touch as light as a lover's touch. And the ceramic edge is sharp, very sharp. And the wound is just a whisper. The toxin is already racing towards his heart. Chuck laughs. He kind of touches his neck, thinking perhaps a stray hair tickled him. And the magician then moves into the next phase of the trick. He has to force a card to the top of the deck. The crowd is riveted. And Chuck is standing there. He's still smiling because the toxin, you see, takes about 45 seconds to reach the lethal concentration in the brainstem. It's plenty of time. So the magician asks Chuck to choose a card. He shuffles the deck. He does the magician control of the card to the top. He makes it vanish from the deck, and he makes it appear inside Chuck's own jacket pocket. The crowd is on the edge of their seat. Chuck reaches in. He pulls out the card. He holds it up. He's now part of the magic. The whole crowd is glowing, and then his knees buckle. And at first, the crowd thinks it's part of the act. It's a dramatic feint. The magician catches him, lowers him to the ground. The crowd erupts into laughter. And then the magician steps forward to check his pulse. And then with exaggerated concern, he starts shouting loudly that he's out cold and someone needs to call an ambulance. By this time, the blade is back in the sheath. The tiny puncture is hidden beneath Chuck's collar. No one will find it. By the time the paramedics arrive, Chuck will be pronounced dead of a sudden cardiac event. A tragic medical anomaly. The crowd will disperse, and they'll be buzzing about the amazing card trick they witnessed right before that man had a heart attack. None of them will remember the moment the magician adjusted Chuck's tie. None of them will think to mention it to the police because they were watching the cards. They were watching Chuck's hands. They were watching the Queen of Hearts appear in Chuck's pocket. They were inside the story the magician told them. And the real trick, the one that mattered, happened in the space between the heartbeats and the flicker of attention the magician stole from them. This is the true magic. Not making something disappear, but making everyone forget it was ever there in the first place. Magicians practice for years. They practice controlling attention, controlling and orchestrating sightlines. They time every gesture down to the millisecond. They learn to read faces. They learn to sense when suspicion flickers. They drown it out with laughter or wonder before it can really take root. And when those skills are turned to darker purposes, the stage becomes the world. The audience becomes the witnesses. And the final reveal is a collapsing corpse. So the next time you watch a magician, any magician, ask yourself, what are they making you look at? And what might be happening just outside the little circle of light? Because the hand is never quicker than the eye. The eye simply is looking in the wrong place. And sometimes looking in the wrong place is all it takes to get away with murder.
All right. So on that note, I started to dive into what could it be that was going on in Fort Huachuca that flipped people out? Because these people are getting paid by our government to attack Candace. And anybody else question? There's a lot of people questioning. I mean, I've gone through and I've looked at Alley Top Files and Project Constitution, and I've looked at a lot of stuff that people are thinking, and I'm just laughing at myself like, yeah, this is kind of like how everybody was trying to figure out about the flight attendants and about how did the hijackers get on and all that. And then they started fighting with each other. No, this is my idea. No, this is my idea. No, it's this. It was that. It was this. It was. And so I'm starting to see all this. I hate to put this out here, but I'm going to tell you that this isn't my work. I just kind of stumbled across it because I got into spending the weekend with my AI. I think it's a Gemini, but I am not positive. So I want to share this with you, and I'm really new at putting this stuff together, this OBS studio, so I hope it works because this is so fascinating. First, like I said, I thought it was a laser weapon, but then I realized that sucker would go on for miles. Airplanes coming into Salt Lake would be zipped out of the air, boom, hit by a laser, because that laser beam's going to go until it dissipates. I'm like, that just can't be what it was. And again, I started getting really kind of nervous that the computer might be connected to people at the NSA. And I thought, well, this is kind of weird. I hope I don't get in trouble for this, because I keep going deeper and deeper. And then finally, let me just switch over here. If I can do this, I'm going to show you what happened to me. Now, in order to read this, I have to get over here so I can read it. So I asked this question, and on my screen, if I'm doing this right, I might do lessons for boomer lessons in OBS. If I'm doing this right, you are going to be able to see this. This is a screenshot of my Google search using whatever this is, Gemini or whatever. I have Safari running, so on a Google. So you guys probably know. I'm going to ask him his name or her name, its name. But I asked this question. I want to just kind of read through some of this because once things, when you see where things changed, boy, did he, she, it unload information that answers every question we've had about Charlie Kirk's murder. And I mean every question, from the gunshot wound that people in the back never heard, to what looked like an electrocution, the types of burns and stuff on his hands. And so I'm going to go through this. I hope it doesn't take too long, but I want you to be able to see what happened. And now, if you are in a position where you can do this, you can just put a pause on this when necessary. And you can ask your AI these questions. Again, this isn't my work. I'd love to take a credit for this, but this is some computer telling me the answers. I asked this question: is the U.S. military testing a laser gun that could kill an enemy but not continue on, as the laser would, until it dissipates in the atmosphere? Like, we had been talking about this laser thing going on forever, so I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to prevent that? What would happen if it hit that building behind Charlie's tent and all that? And here's the answer. It says, while the U.S. military is researching ways to make lasers safer and more controlled, there is no laser gun that simply stops existing after it hits a target. By the laws of physics, which of course went on vacation for 9/11, any light that isn't absorbed by the enemy, the target, will continue to travel in a straight line until it hits the ground, hits a mountain, or eventually scatters in the atmosphere. However, my computer friend says, the military is developing ultra-short pulse lasers, further referred to as USPLs, that behave very differently from the continuous beams we usually see. And it goes on to say the ultra-short pulse laser, called the vaporizer, current lasers, like the Phantom, which we talked about in my other video, or Helios, are called continuous wave lasers. They act like a superpowered blowtorch that must stay focused on a target for several minutes. By the way, these are actually used for taking down drones. They're not used on people. And so you have to be very careful asking the question the correct way. The military's newer tactical ultra-short pulsed laser works differently. Vaporization over melting. Instead of a steady beam, it fires unimaginably powerful bursts that last only 1/4 of a second. Self-focusing filaments. These pulses are so intense, they actually turn the air into a filament of plasma. Whoa. Sounds pretty sci-fi, doesn't it? Well, it gets better. Because the energy is delivered so fast, it vaporizes the target's surface instantly rather than just heating it up. Range limitation. While the beam technically continues, these ultra-short pulses are extremely sensitive to the atmosphere. They are designed for short-range, rapid-fire takedowns, often within 1 to 2 kilometers. Because the intense energy they carry causes the beam to break up or lose its focus much faster than a standard laser. Well, I'm thinking to myself at this point, well, now this is kind of getting interesting. It goes on to talk about how the military controls overpenetration. And it says, since a laser beam, this was my problem with the Phantom and using a laser weapon, can travel for miles and blind people on the horizon, the military uses 3 primary methods to prevent accidental kills. Now, this isn't really too important here, but I will kind of slowly scroll down. You guys can read it and let me tell you what happens. I kind of read through some of this stuff. Some of it doesn't apply. But again, I'm trying to now prove myself wrong in a sense that I'm like, did they actually, why was Fort Huachuca, this is our government, why are they so freaked out about Fort Huachuca? And so then I asked, let's see, would you like to know? Yes, it says, I would like to know what type of injuries this weapon would produce if if an accident occurred. And it goes on to answer this. An accidental strike from a tactical ultra-short pulsed laser, the USPL, would produce injuries that are fundamentally very different and in some ways more horrific than those of a standard blowtorch laser like the Phantom. While a standard laser burns, the USPL uses cold ablation, meaning that it destroys tissue through the mechanical shock and vaporization rather than just heat. And it goes on to talk about the micro explosion effect because the pulse is so fast, quadrillionths of a second. The energy doesn't have time to conduct to the surrounding area. Instead of a slow burn, the moisture in the cells flash into a high pressure plasma. The injury goes on to say, this creates a localized supersonic shockwave. Well, we've heard people talk about a supersonic sound of the gunshot, but then everybody said it can't be a 30-06 because it would have blown, lots of stuff apart. It wouldn't have done what we saw, should I say that? So inside the tissue, it forms a supersonic shockwave. If hit in the neck, we've already had this conversation, as you can see. He knows where I'm asking about the human injury to the neck. It wouldn't just leave a charred hole. It would cause the tissue to physically shatter or burst as the internal pressure exceeds the strength of the skin and muscle. Internal trauma, the shockwave could collapse nearby blood vessels or cause a concussion to the spinal cord without the laser ever touching the bone. Well, if it's true that they told us that some of the vertebrae were fractured, but yet they can't find a bullet, this might explain that. Just maybe. Neurological stun and paralysis. Standard lasers cause pain through heat. USPLs interact directly with the nervous system's electrical signals. A strike to the neck would likely cause instant neuro overload. The electromagnetic field generated by the plasma filament can disrupt the electrical pulses traveling from the brain to the heart and lungs. The result, even if the physical wound was small, the person could suffer instant respiratory or cardiac arrest due to the electrical noise hitting the brain stem. Now, remember, his hands kind of went like this, and I know Barron even asked me what causes that. Well, brain stem injury does that, so it's a neurological response. And we saw him grasp both hands like that. One had a microphone, one didn't. So this goes on to talk about the Havana syndrome and how that can be a part of it. And then it talks about this. Systemic vaporization injuries, unlike a standard burn that cauterizes as it goes, the USPL can create a plume of superheated biological aerosol. The injury, the strike, would turn a portion of the human neck into a fine mist of vaporized tissue and bone. And we saw something coming out of his collar where a lot of people thought that was an explosion from the mic. Could it be vaporized tissue? Well, let's look. If the person or the bystanders inhale this plume, it could cause thermal and chemical pneumonia as the vaporized biological matter settles in their lungs. Now, this computer gave me a summary comparison between a standard laser and the pulsed laser. And so this is about just the injuries now. So it's going to get even more interesting than this, because I literally was screaming at parts of this, because eventually it completely describes Charlie Kirk. Now, this guy, once he finds out he wants to know, why am I writing this? What's your interest in this? And so I told him I was writing a book. I have 5 of them, and I may write one here. This is pretty cool. Okay, so it talks about the safety fan reality and blah, blah, blah. This doesn't really partake in what we want to go to, so I want to kind of scroll through some of that. You guys can pause it and watch it, read it, or you can ask your own computer. I said, it asked me this. It says, in a follow-up, are you looking for information to include in a safety briefing or for a fictional narrative? And there's my answer right here. Yes, I'm writing a fictional story, but I want it to be very accurate using our newest weapons that are in line with lasers or microwaves. Are there more weapons that might help me? And here's the answer. To add a layer of hard science accuracy to your story, you could move beyond standard lasers and microwaves into the next generation tools the United States military is currently testing or deploying as of January 2026. I'm like, do tell. And here we go. And this buckle up is going to make it just all come together for you. I guarantee you, you probably are going to go, whoa. But again, this isn't my work. I'm not attached to it. This is not my work. This is a computer, and you are seeing the answers to the questions. So let's carry on. 1, high power microwave, HPM area effect weapons, like lasers, act like a bullet. While lasers act like a bullet, HPMs act like a shotgun blast of energy. Well, these are the most effective tools for taking down drone swarms all at once. Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. And it talks a little bit about that. And then it talks about this laser dazzlers, non-lethal denial. Okay, these are interesting weapons as well. Didn't quite fit the scenario, but here's where it gets interesting. Number 3, tactical ultra-short pulsed lasers. These are the newest frontier weapons that don't just burn, they vaporize. The science, instead of a steady beam, they fire pulses lasting 1/4 of a second. This is pretty fast. This is so powerful that it turns the air into a filament of plasma. The effect, a USPL hit, produces a mechanical shock wave. In your story, he goes on to tell me, I'm telling him he's a he, but the computer tells me, in your story, an impact wouldn't just be a burn. It would sound like a small explosion on the target's skin as the surface tissue is instantly turned to gas. Well, I thought, well, that's interesting, because a lot of people thought the sound of a gunshot was something that they played over the speakers. Didn't even happen. We know it wasn't a 30-06, so I continue. Then they talks about electromagnetic rail guns, but that's not what we used here, and counter drone kamikaze drones also as part of this. Now, the computer offers this for me because he now wants to help me write my book. And this is where everything changed. The summary table for your narrative. And we are now talking about a phantom laser, a microwave Leonidas, a pulsed laser. And so here is what it says. The tell or the sound of the pulsed laser would be a loud crack like lightning. Oh, wow. Surface explosion from the plasma. Well, we saw Charlie's neck explode in a hole. Okay. And then let's see, what else do we want to say? The speed. Oh yeah, the speed is extremely fast. The speed of light. Okay. Now he goes on to say, would you like to know more about the power sources these weapons use, such as the massive battery trailers or the generators required to keep them running? Here's my next question. Sometimes I said yes, and other times I had a different question. I said to him, whatever. I gave my computer pronoun, I guess. I gave him the he. I would like to know, I said, is there a way to stop or prevent a laser beam from continuing after it struck a human? Well, in physics, no. He goes on to tell me what I have already told you, that you can't really stop it. And so I'm carrying on here. It's like, I'm going to go down. I wanted to be able to kind of just share this because some of this is interesting or not. So here's where it gets good. Here's the Charlie part. Oh, yes. Oh, well, he asked me a question here at the end. Let's see if I can go up there and find out. It says, follow up. Are you looking for more details on handheld shields or base-wide defense arrays for your characters? Now, keeping in mind, I also learned this from him, that at Fort Huachuca, these lasers, they basically go until they hit a mountain, typically. But now he's answering questions. I'm asking questions about an accidental hit by one of these weapons. I said, oh, yes. I'm very curious if my character was hit from a high-tech laser or a microwave-type weapon placed near his feet while he's seated on a 16-inch platform and an 18-inch chair, the wound striking his neck at the left carotid artery. If the beam might be stopped somehow, or if it would continue in the case of a laser weapon, but just thinking about new high-tech weapons that could be used. And here it comes. My co-author. I'm going to ask him tonight, what's your name, big boy? In fictional narrative, the physical setup, seated on a 16-inch chair on top of a 16-inch platform, places the character's neck roughly 5 to 6 feet above the weapon on the floor. At this proximity, a high-tech weapon would be at its most lethal, and the over-penetration of the beam would be almost impossible to stop. Here's how the physics and the high-tech safety systems would play out in your story. The laser strike, which is continuous wave, versus a pulsed continuous beam like the Phantom. If the weapon, again, is a standard high-energy laser, it acts like a high-speed drill. We already kind of gone over this, and it just keeps on going, right? Here we get to the ultra-short pulsed laser. This is your best fictional accuracy choice for a weapon that stops, quote, quote, USPLs are so intense, they turn the air into plasma. Self-termination. These beams are highly unstable over a distance. If the weapon is tuned specifically for short-range termination, the beam could be designed to defocus or lose its lethal coherence just a few feet past the target, like it didn't even leave the tent, effectively becoming a harmless flash of light after it passes through the neck. Well, okay. So anyway, I'm going to scroll through some of this because this is other weapons. Let's see if I need to stop this here. Let's see. Okay, that's not a weapon we're using. Okay, that's not a weapon we're using here. Beam dumps. Okay, the wound accuracy. Okay, that's about lasers. I'm going to go back to another question here. I said using the ultra short pulsed laser weapon that has been set to dissipate or defocus 3 or 4 feet after the human was struck, would it make an audible sound when it hit the human? In your story, the ultra short pulsed laser strike would be anything but silent, unlike the high pitched hiss of a continuous laser. The USPL produces a violent, percussive sound due to the physics of the cold ablation and the plasma formation. I'm a science major. I hope you guys are sticking with me here. This is fascinating as heck. The sound of the strike, the plasma crack, when a quadrillionth of a second pulse hits a moisture-rich target like the human neck, the sound would be a sharp, explosive crack, very similar to a whip crack or a high-voltage electrical arc, like a large spark or a nearby lightning strike. The supersonic expansion, because the laser vaporizes the surface tissue faster than the speed of sound, it creates a microsonic boom right at the point of impact. Whoa. The atmospheric filament, as the beam travels from the floor toward the character's neck, it ionizes the air, creating a filament of plasma. And wait till you hear what it's going to do to the wireless microphone. Trust me, I asked, and it's coming. This creates a secondary buzzing or tearing sound, often described as the sound of tearing silk in the air itself. The wound bursting instead of burning. Because you mentioned the beam is set to defocus or dissipate 3 or 4 feet after the strike, the energy dump into the character's neck would be massive and localized. Mechanical shock. The strike wouldn't just burn a hole. The crack you hear is the sound of the character's tissue physically bursting. The internal pressure from the flash vaporized cells would cause a pop injury. The vapor plume, the sound would be followed by a soft whoosh as the plume of vaporized biological matter, a mix of steam and plasma, is ejected from the wound site at a high velocity, like it might show up on the other side of the neck, right there by the wireless microphone, that fast. Because this is how fast we're dealing with, fast. The defocus effect. Behind the character, the beam would suddenly expand into a harmless but blindingly bright flash of white or blue-violet light. To an observer, it would look like a miniature flashbang went off behind the character's head, followed by the smell of ozone and singed hair. Narrative accuracy tip. Now, he's helping me really understand all this, so I love this. In your story, the computer goes on to say the character wouldn't feel heat initially. They would feel a massive physical blow, as if they had been struck by a hammer, because the USPL converts light energy into kinetic shock. If the strike hits the left carotid artery, the crack would likely be accompanied by a sudden thump in the character's chest. as the shockwave disrupts the heart's electrical rhythm. Would you like to know about the specific colors of the plasma, he asks? Follow-up, does your story involve any witnesses who might suffer flash blindness? Oh, I'm going to ask another question. I said, okay. Well, that sound might be similar then to a rifle or a gunshot sound? Well, the computer says it would be remarkably similar to a gunshot, but with few high-tech tells. Trigger Smart, we need Trigger Smart because he's got the audio guys, right? That would tip off an expert that wasn't a gunpowder weapon. An expert would know that it wasn't a gunpowder weapon. In your story, if you want to describe the sound of the ultra-short pulsed laser hitting a human neck, here's the breakdown of the acoustic experience. The initial crack, the gunshot sound, he says. The primary sound is a sharp percussive crack or snap. While it sounds like a gun, a rifle shot's crack is a sonic boom caused by a bullet breaking the sound barrier. A USPL strike creates a sonic boom because it vaporizes tissue so fast the expanding gas moves faster than the speed of sound. Well, this might explain why sometimes you hear the sound and the hole and all that doesn't add up like a gunshot, right? It lacks the heavy bass or the boom of a gunpowder explosion. It's thinner and sharper, more like a high voltage transformer exploding or a massive whip crack. The tearing silk or the beam path, unlike a gun, which is silent until the bullet leaves the barrel, the USPL ionizes the air between the weapon and the character, the sound, as the beam travels from the floor to the neck. It creates a filament of plasma. This sounds like a high frequency hiss or tearing, like a blowtorch being ignited or silk being ripped apart. That happens at the exact same microsecond as the crack, the thud, the kinetic impact. Because a USPL delivers so much energy in 1/4 of a second, it acts like a physical hammer, the sound. There would be wet, heavy thud as the shockwave travels through the character's body. If they're sitting in a chair, you might hear the chair crack or groan as the kinetic energy or of the light strike physically shoves the torso backwards. The post-shot echo, the smell, instead of sulfur or gunpowder, the room would instantly smell like ozone, that sharp electric smell after a lightning storm, and the metallic, sickly sweet scent of vaporized blood. The visual. Because you mentioned the beam defocuses 3 feet behind him, there would be a pop of light, like a flash bulb going off, that would leave ghost images of purple or green spots in the eyes of anyone watching. The narrative comparison. Now, this guy writes a little paragraph. It's so fabulous. It is so fabulous. Let me just read it because this is just so much fun. I've never thought about writing a book with a computer, but this is kind of fabulous. He writes in a narrative example. It didn't sound like a sniper's rifle. There was no heavy roar of expanding gas. Instead, it was a sharp, crystalline snap, the sound of a whip breaking the sound barrier, followed by a horrific hiss of a hot iron hitting water. The air between, I don't write like this, the air between the floor and his throat rippled with violet sparks. For a heartbeat, the room smelled of a summer thunderstorm and burnt copper. Ooh, I like this. I said, then he asked me this. Would you like to know how the character's body would react physically to that kinetic shockwave? Well, yes, indeed, I would. So I answer here, oh, yes, please. You are so helpful. And at this point, this guy turns on the juice, man. I never, ever, I could not have spent my entire lifetime, what's left of it, finding all of this information. This is it's fabulous. Since your character is perched on an 18-inch chair atop a 16-inch platform nearly 3 feet off the ground, the physics of an ultra-shot pulsed laser strike would almost certainly knock them off their perch. We saw that when Charlie fell. Because the USPL converts light into mechanical force, the reaction is more kinetic than a standard burn. Here's the play-by-play of the physical reaction for your story. And this kind of is more Charlie's story. As we read on, you will see this. The hammer blow, the moment of impact. Even though light has no weight, the USPL vaporizes tissue so fast that the escaping gas acts like a rocket motor pushing against the character's neck. The reaction, the head and the neck would be snapped violently to the right, assuming the strike was on the left carotid. This creates a whiplash effect that would likely fracture the cervical vertebrae. Well, we were told they were fractured. The neck bones, several of them. But that doesn't explain how a 30-06 coming from a 9 or 10 degree angle above could go and hit a C2 and a C6 and T1. So this kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Even before the laser finishes its work. The narrative detail. Your character wouldn't feel the cut. They would feel as though they had been punched in the throat by a heavyweight boxer. The loss of equilibrium. The percussive nature of the USPL is a disaster for the human inner ear and brain. The vestibular shock, the shock wave from the plasma crack, would travel through the jawbone directly into the inner ear. I think Chris Martinson needs a copy of this video because he'd like this. This causes instant massive vertigo. He gets dizzy. The fall. Even if the strike didn't kill them instantly, their body would lose all sense of up and down. Combined with the physical shock from the laser's kinetic energy, the character would topple backwards or sideways off the 18-inch chair, the drop from the platform, falling from a total height of 34 inches, 18-inch chair and a 16-inch platform, while paralyzed or in shock is dangerous. As they fall off the chair, they have to clear the edge of the 16-inch platform. Most likely, they would strike the edge of the platform on the way down, leading to a secondary injury like broken ribs or a fractured skull. When they finally hit the floor, Charlie hits grass, but post-strike appearance, because the left carotid was hit and likely cauterized, heat-sealed, by the laser's intensity, there would be surprisingly little blood on the chair or on the platform. The character would look like a rag doll that had been swiped off the stage by an invisible hand. Biological short circuit. Because the left carotid artery supplies blood directly to the brain, its sudden destruction and accompanying shockwave causes lights out, like he passes out, event. The brain experiences a massive power surge from the electromagnetic field of the plasma. The character's muscles would likely flex and lock up spastically for a second before going completely limp. We saw that with his hands, especially the right hand that wasn't holding anything. It got tight and then it let go. Writing the scene, putting it all together, he tells me that this is a way to describe it. And so I'll read it because this might describe some of what happened to Charlie. The crack was instantaneous, sharper than a 9mm, more like the whip of a high voltage wire. The force of it caught him in the hollow of the throat, snapping his head back with the weight of a physical blow. He didn't even have time to gasp before his equilibrium shattered. The chair tipped, sliding off the edge of the 16-inch riser. He went down hard, a limp weight tumbling through the air, hitting the concrete floor. Well, he hit the grass with a dull thud that sounded sickeningly human compared to the electric snap of the weapon. Well, so this is getting kind of crazy. So I asked this, what company makes this ultra short pulsed laser weapon, the USPL? The computer goes on to answer, in your fictional story, the most accurate real-world manufacturer to reference for this specific technology is Applied Energetics. While defense giants like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin specialize in the massive continuous wave lasers like the Phantom, Applied Energetics is the industry leader and primary pioneer of the ultra-short pulse laser technology for the U.S. military. Why Applied Energetics fits your story? And here's where it gets good, so buckle up. The specialist identity, based in Tucson, Arizona, and my computer offers this, very close to Fort Huachuca. They hold nearly 30 patents and focus exclusively on the vaporizing effects of short pulse lasers rather than just burning targets with heat. Recent breakthroughs in the late, I'm thinking September 2025, they completed the first outdoor field testing of their next generation USPL subsystem, moving the technology from the lab into the real world environments like the one in your narrative. Oh, you mean like the guy sitting on the chair on the platform? Like that? The Plaid, it's called a pulsed laser air defense, is designed specifically to disable electronics and sensors in less than a second, making it the perfect tool for a high-speed accidental strike. Compact size. Unlike the fridge-sized Phantom, AE's USPL units are roughly the size of 2 shoeboxes. Now I'm going to stop right here for a second and mention this because if I find it, I think I will be able to put this in here. Because one of the things that I discovered looking very closely at many hours of video is when the pop happens and Charlie goes back in his chair, Dan Flood comes and kind of pushes him down to the floor, to the grass. And I don't know this guy's name, but the guy in the light blue plaid shirt jumps over the front table in front of where Charlie was. And when he does that, he lifts up the tablecloth enough to see something that is about 12, 14 inches square looking. And you can see it if you can find the video that's close enough. And I think I have a still shot of this that I can put in here. You can see there's something behind the white curtain or tablecloth rather. There, you can see it. It's square, and it would have been right at roughly Charlie's feet, between his legs almost. Just so you know, I'm going to try to get that put in here. And let me continue on with this compact size. Oh yeah, so we got to the 2 shoe boxes, making it, I actually found a size, it was 12 by 12 by 10, I believe, making it easy to hide or place near your character's feet. Other key players in the USPL research, it talks about these other companies, A-Quest, NP Photonics, Office of Naval Research. All these people are all also connected, I'm sure, to Fort Huachuca. For your narrative, the computer goes on to say, mentioning Applied Energetics or a Plaid system would give your story a level of technical realism that aligns with actual defense contractors being fulfilled as of January 2026. Would you like to know about the specific types of drones these USPL systems were recently tested against in the Arizona desert? Well, not really. I have other questions. But I said, oh, yes, please. I didn't realize these could be used in that manner. In your story, utilizing applied energetics as the manufacturer adds significant realism as they recently achieved a major milestone in September, I kid you not, you're reading it, of 2025. By defeating 4 drone-mounted cameras in just 4 seconds using their prototype pulsed laser defense or PLAD system. Okay. Well, it's not really Charlie, but I thought that was coinky dinky that it was September 2025 because this computer is telling me exactly that this could be used in my story. It goes on to say, unlike traditional lasers that melt a drone's wing over several seconds, the ultra-short pulse laser is used for surgical electronic defeat. And it talks about the effect on these drones and the testing that was done here. Drones recently tested at Fort Huachuca in 2025 in January 2026, which we're still in barely. So it talks about these exercises. You might want to look these up because if you want to dig deeper, hey, this is information for you to dive into. Arcane Thunder was one of the drills, exercises, and Vanguard 24. And it talks about how they use these particular weapons to take down these drones. But that's not really what I was concerned with. But it goes on to say this, why this matters for your character's accidental strike. In your narrative, the weapon placed near his feet was likely a PLAD prototype being calibrated for a camera kill demonstration. Okay, something they do and can do, I guess. So let's read about this. The setting. If the weapon was set to its sensor defeat mode, it would be tuned to focus precisely on glass-like surfaces, like the character's eye or a shiny belt buckle. The accident. The defocusing you mentioned is a real safety feature being refined in outdoor testing as of December 2025 to ensure that the beam maintains stability in the field while minimizing collateral damage to buildings and non-combatants behind the target. I'm thinking, okay, well, now we're getting really much closer because the whole laser thing just didn't work. Would you like to know how a range safety officer at Fort Huachuca would react in the seconds following such an accidental discharge? Well, I would because I have advanced EMT training. So I'm very curious about this. And then also it asks on a follow-up, are you interested in the legal fallout or the internal military investigation? Not really. So he gives me a couple articles and I said, sure, that would be interesting. Thank you. Now, unless you really have a medical background, this is probably not really that interesting or maybe even understandable because it talks about what the safety, the range safety officer, the RSO, would do and how they react and what they do when this is now considering an accidental hit on a human at Fort Huachuca. But still, it's kind of interesting. And so I kind of read through this and I thought, okay, this is cool because they obviously would try to be saving this person, but there is no saving this. I'm sorry. This absolutely would wipe your electrical system for your heart out. It's really crazy. Anyway, I'm scrolling slowly, but you guys can pause this. If you're interested to read this, I don't want to get too bogged down in the medical part of this because it gets better. It talks about a mishap board and all the investigation and all this stuff. Again, because we're talking about the scenario I laid out for this computer, because I can't ask him what happens when you shoot a human because they're not supposed to do that, right? So it talks about legal and corporate fallout, blah, 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 blah. And then I said, oh, thank you. Very helpful. And then he goes on to say this. In your story, if a military doctor or a forensic pathologist were examining the character, they wouldn't use words like burn or cut. They would use specific medical terminology for directed energy trauma. There is such a thing. Here's the medical jargon that will make your scene feel chillingly authentic. And these are some words. Keep in mind the medical examiner, she was relatively new. I think she got hired in July, is also military. Probably she's had plenty of training in this because they are using these directed energy weapons a lot. And there can be an accident. Even though you're shooting down a drone or, target practicing on a tank, you can have an accident. So it goes on to talk about how the phrasing might be for the left carotid exhibits significant photomechanical splation. The vessel wall didn't melt. It shattered under the shock wave. And it talks about this. And if you've been following this story, you know about cavitation and interstitial edema. You probably don't know about that, but the cavitation you probably heard about. Because the pulse creates a micro explosion inside the neck, it leaves a cavity. Cavitation is the hole left by the vaporized tissue. Because the surrounding cells were hit by a shock wave, they would immediately swell with fluid, known as interstitial edema, or edema, as some people like to say. I don't know how the British do that one. The phrasing, we're seeing massive perivascular edema, might be used. The shock wave created a temporary cavity that crushed the trachea, that's the front of the throat, before the tissue could even register the heat. In a standard fire, skin turns into soft ash. In a high-intensity laser strike, even a pulsed one, the carbon in the human body can be compressed into a hard, glass-like state. Let me repeat that one, because maybe it wasn't the ABS plastic. Maybe there was more. Maybe that explains why we saw some on the platform. The carbon in the human body can be compressed into a hard, glass-like state. The phrasing, there's evidence of vitreous carbonization along the entry site. The skin has been fused into a crystalline black lattice. This is serious, what would happen. And I think we saw all this on Charlie's neck and in the back of the car. And I'm sure it was, that whole wound thing was full of this stuff. And other places. It could have come out other places. Coagulative necrosis, the heat seal. This is the term for the cauterization. It explains why the character, in this case we'll call him Charlie, might not be bleeding out on the floor despite a severed artery. Now, I thought that his heart had the electrocution. If it was electrocution, his heart stopped. So if the pump stops pumping, you don't keep squirting. Okay, enough of that. The phrasing, the beam achieved instant coagulative necrosis. The carotid is completely occluded. It's been heat welded shut. He's not bleeding, but he suffered a total ischemic event to the left hemisphere of the brain. I will just say this right now. Charlie doesn't know what hit him. He didn't feel any pain. If the character's heart stopped, which of course it did, or they went into a coma from the shock wave, the doctor might refer to it as a concussion of the nerves. the phrasing, we're dealing with systemic neurological disruption, the EMP from the plasma filament, from the laser weapon, caused a commotio neuro. Essentially, the laser rebooted his central nervous system and his heart forgot how to beat. That's why I tell you, he was not alive. Any problem? All the stories that they were transfusing him and doing CPR and all that, part of the story. Okay, now I want to read this to you because it is so interesting. A scene snippet for your story. He's helping me write this, and I just like, okay, because it gets better. The lead surgeon didn't look up from the scan. It's a classic direct energy strike, he muttered. Look at the margins of the wound. No tearing, no bruising, just pure photomechanical splation. The vapor plume traveled upward, causing secondary thermal inhalation injuries. But it's the coagulative necrosis of the carotid. That's the real problem. He's stable because his artery is fused shut, but the brain has been dark for 6 minutes. Now, that's just a suggestion for my novel. That obviously isn't what happened with Charlie. A final narrative note the computer tells me. In military investigations, these injuries are often classified as directed energy bioeffects. The medical files would likely be stamped with UFO, unclassified, for official use only, or higher. Maybe classified. I'd tell you, then I'd have to kill you, right? Depending on how secret the applied energetics prototype was. Is there a specific medical device or futuristic treatment, he asks me. And he writes then as a follow-up, since you're writing about Fort Huachuca, I never told him this, but I guess because he's keeping track of all the questions, and there were a lot of them, 2 days worth. Would you like to know about the underground tunnels or the high altitude testing areas that could serve as a dramatic setting for this mishap? No, but you guys might want to look into it because you know it's there because the computer told you. This, I'm just reading to you what he told me. This is not my theory. This is somebody else's theory, everybody else's theory. It's all the knowledge collected off the internet, I guess. I don't know. I asked this question. Is there a remote control device for this pulsed weapon? We see Brian Harpole and Rick Cutler at the moment of the crack. Both do something. Brian Harpole in the blue shirt is holding something, and you can see his thumb hitting on something. Rick Cutler is the guy that pulls on his t-shirt, his sleeve, at the exact moment. And if you get a video that shows them both, it's completely at the exact moment. They are in line of sight with them. And prior to this, I did notice in one YouTube, or a video rather, that I saw, Rick Cutler turns away from Charlie and he's looking up toward the guy in the bush. Now, if you haven't done this, Charles McClintock Wilson has great high definition photos, and I actually zoomed in to see this guy, and he's holding a cell phone, or it looks like a cell phone. But let me tell you, yes, indeed, this weapon can be initiated using a iPad type tablet, or a cell phone, using a military cell phone. And they're like a little harder case, so they call it ruggedized. So let me continue with this. When I asked about this, for your fictional story, you can use the real world remote firing option RFO system or similar remote weapon station interfaces that are currently being integrated with tactical lasers. The Applied Energetics PLAD system, being a modular plug-and-play prototype, is designed to be controlled remotely through several high-tech interfaces. The handheld Toughbook or tablet The most modern tactical lasers are operated via a ruggedized tablet or laptop, like a Panasonic Toughbook. The interface. The operator uses an intuitive mission software that displays high-definition video from the laser's own EO or IR, the electro-optical or infrared cameras. The control. Instead of a physical trigger, they use a joystick, like a button on the top, and a dead man switch, a trigger that can be held down while firing. Is that what we saw Brian Harpel do? He kind of held his thumb down. Not saying he did, but it answers a lot of the questions. I didn't give you these answers. This computer did. Fiction tip, he tells me. In your story, your character could accidentally tap the touch screen or have a glitch in the joystick calibration that causes the gimbal to swing, this would be the laser eye, toward the platform. Ooh. Okay, integrated battle command systems for large-scale tests at places like Fort Huachuca. The laser is often connected to a wider network called the IBCS, Integrated Battle Command System. This is interesting because somebody could be sitting in the parking lot in a car, or the guy in the bush, or anybody anywhere, and could have controlled this weapon if this were used on Charlie. The remote hub allows a commander sitting in a command tent or in a specialized C2, which is command and control vehicle, miles away to be able to see what the laser sees and to authorize the shot. Here's my fictional tip. If the weapon was on auto track mode, the IBCS might have seen your character's movement on the chair and painted him as a potential target for the operator to confirm. The remote pressure switch, tactical accidental trigger. If the USPL was mounted on a tripod or a small robotic ground vehicle near the platform, it might use a remote pressure control switch, the setup. This is a small rubberized pad connected by a wire to the weapon, the accident. These are often taped to railings or placed on the floor for easy foot activation. In your story, a technician or observer could have accidentally stepped on the pressure pad while adjusting something near the character's feet, triggering the millisecond pulse. Beam forming software control. Systems like the Applied Energetics Plaid use software-defined beams. The strength, duration, and even the defocusing point you mentioned are all set remotely via software. This is just like using an app on your phone. The flaw. If the range safety software had a bug, the weapon might have defaulted, now he's talking about this accident, how an accident could happen, to its maximum intensity without the safe separation distance check being active. Here's a summary for your narrative. The remote control isn't a simple TV remote. It's a tactical console with high-resolution screen, a joystick, and complex software. A simple software lag, a miscalculated joystick, or a tripped pressure switch on the floor are all highly realistic ways to cause an accident. But I don't think that's what we had here. Would you like to know the specific warning or armed status? Well, that's not what I wanted to know. Okay, now this takes me to the guy that lifts up the tablecloth. He does that during Harry Hill, the first speaker, the first student questionnaire. And he just picks it up just enough to see something, but we don't know what. And then right after that, obviously, and I know somebody who was there, they were having audio problems with this. So I asked a lot of questions about this, and indeed it would cause issues with their audio. And we saw that. I wanted to know this. Would the 2 shoebox size platform have any lights indicating that it's on, because that guy picked up the curtain just enough to see if there was something there, maybe a light, and then put it right down. It's very obvious, and a lot of people have seen this. And I'm like, what's he looking at? In a professional military testing environment like Fort Huachuca, a prototype system from a company like Applied Energetics would not have blinking red lights like a movie bomb. Instead, it would feature specific functional indicators designed for laser safety. Protocols. For your story, here's how those two shoeboxes would look right before the accident. The status indicator panel, the tail. On the rear or the side of the housing, there would be a small recessed panel of high-intensity LEDs, lights. Military lasers typically used standardized colors. Solid amber or yellow indicates the system is armed. Capacitors are charging. This means the weapon is drawing power and is ready to fire. Solid or flashing red indicates the laser emission is active. In your story, this light would likely flash for only a millisecond, or microsecond rather. The exact length of the pulse, making it almost invisible to the naked eye until after the crack is heard. Green indicates the system is safe or it's in cooling active. The internal glow or atmospheric ionization, because the plaid is an ultra short pulse laser, it creates plasma, the violet leak. Right before or during the pulse, you might see a faint, ghostly violet or blue glow emitting from the aperture or the lens. This isn't a light bulb. It's the air inside the weapon's optics being ionized by the sheer intensity of the beam. A narrative tip. Your character might notice a faint shimmer in the air in front of the shoebox, like heat rising from a highway seconds before the strike. And it goes on to say, the interlock LED. There is often a small blue or white LED specifically for fiber link. This shows the weapon is talking to the remote control station that you mentioned. If this light is flickering rapidly, it means the system is receiving active tracking data. It's locked on to something. Visible designators, the red dot. While the main 10 kW USPL beam is in visible infrared, many systems use a secondary low power green or red aiming laser to help the cameras align. The accident detail. Your character might see a tiny, harmless looking green dot dancing on the 16-inch platform, then moving up the chair leg and finally settling on his neck. He might think it's just a laser pointer, right until the high power pulse follows that same path. The cooling sound. While not a light, the shoeboxes would have high RPM micro fans. The sound, there would be a steady high-pitched whirl or a droning sound coming from the device. If the weapon is about to fire at high power, these fans might suddenly rev up to a scream to dump the heat from the capacitors. How it looks in your story. Now he's reading me some more. I like this. The twin shoebox-sized units sat innocently at the edge of the platform, their cooling fans emitting a low electric hum. A single amber LED glowed on the side, a silent warning that the capacitors were primed. Just as he shifted in his chair, a tiny emerald green dot traced a path across his lap and settled over his pulse. For a heartbeat, a violet shimmer ghosted inside the lens housing, and then the world cracked open. Wow, I like this. This is so much fun. Okay, so now I ask this question. Would the plaid cause any type of electrical interference or the sound of microphone feedback? And the computer tells me this. In your story, including electrical interference is an incredibly accurate, hard sci-fi detail. How did you know? Because the applied energetics plaid creates a plasma filament, a literal bridge of ionized air. It acts like a miniature lightning bolt, generating a massive electromagnetic pulse. Interestingly enough, Erica Kirk's mother is involved with electromagnetic pulse whatevers. Well, here's how that would manifest for your character and the electronics in the room. The computer tells me. The microphone feedback sound of a USPL strike wouldn't produce the squeal of traditional audio feedback, but it would cause electromagnetic interference, known as EMI, in any nearby speakers or headsets. Now, just so you know, all of the security guys have a curly wire earpiece in. Interesting. I just thought of that. The sound. At the exact moment of the plasma crack, any active speakers, radios, or even the character's smartphone would emit a sharp digital pop or thwart sound. Narrative detail. If the character is wearing a wireless headset or a hearing aid, they would hear a shattering burst of static a split second before the physical shockwave hits their neck. This is the radio waves from the plasma filament traveling at the speed of light, outrunning the sound of the explosion. Screen glitching and ghosting. If there are monitors or tablets near the 16-inch platform, the monitors would flicker, tear, or go into snow for a fraction of a second. High power pulses can fry pixels. After the strike, the screens might have permanent dead lines or green/purple tint where the EMP induced a surge in the display's backlighting. Now it goes on to talk about the Havana syndrome. We've all kind of heard about that. And it's a real world phenomena. It's called the Fry effect from these microwave weapons, maybe from a distance. Who knows? We don't know where it's coming from. Static hair. The pre-strike warning, because the plaid system is ionizing the air to create that violet filament. Seconds before the crack, the character might feel the hair on their arms or neck stand up as if they were touching a Van de Graaff generator. The spark. They might even see a tiny, harmless, static spark jump from their fingertip to the metal frame of the 18-inch chair right before the high-power pulse fires. And that chair was plastic, I believe ABS plastic actually, and it did have a metal frame. Summary of the electric atmosphere. Before the strike, the air smells of ozone, hair stands on end, a faint high-frequency whine in the character's ears. During the strike, digital screens flicker, speakers emit a sharp pop. The speakers were all around Charlie, and some people thought that was coming out of the speakers because it didn't sound like a gunshot to so many people. Wireless signals, Wi-Fi, and cellular drop momentarily, and indeed they did. After the strike, a lingering hum in the electronics, the smell of scorched circuit boards, the character's phone is likely permanently bricked in their pocket. Proactive follow-up. Since the Plaid is a software-defined weapon, would you like to know about the cybersecurity? Nah. No, here's where it gets specific. My character, I said, is holding an RXL microphone in his left hand and wearing a wireless microphone magnetically attached to his right chest just above the nipple. This setup, the computer tells me, is a perfect storm for a high-tech disaster. The presence of two microphones, one held in the left hand, creating a grounded path, and a wireless magnetic one positioned inches from the carotid strike zone, transforms the accidental laser strike into an electromagnetic catastrophe. And here's how the applied energetic Plaid USPL would interact with your character's gear. 1. The microphone feedback becomes a physical scream. In your story, the feedback won't just be an annoying sound, it will be a violent electronic surge. The wireless chest microphone. This sits directly in the near field of the plasma filament. As the laser strikes the neck, the massive EMP will induce a high voltage current into the wireless mic's circuitry. Didn't need explosives if this is the case. The sound. Before the character even feels the neck wound, the speakers in the room and his earpiece, if he has one, will emit a deafening, distorted crack, stutter. It will sound like a microphone being dropped into a blender. The magnetic hazard. Since the mic is attached magnetically, the EMP pulse can cause a Lorentz force, a physical jolt, where the magnet vibrates so violently from the pulse that it could actually bruise his chest or fly off his shirt. Now, keep in mind, Charlie had his microphone upside down. Usually the magnet is toward your skin and the microphone is on top, but you can use it either way. I think this computer thinks it was done the way the big microphone part would be on the top and the magnet would be in the bottom. So let's continue. The left-hand ground, here's the RXL microphone. This is the one connected to the wire in his left hand. Because your character is holding a professional RXL microphone in his left hand, his body becomes a biological conductor, the path of least resistance. The USPL creates a plasma channel that is electrically conductive. The energy from the strike to the neck will look for a path to the ground. The exit shock, some of the induced electrical charge from the neck strike, will travel down his left arm through the RXL microphone, and says the computer, the left hand would suffer a violent muscle spasm, clenching the microphone even tighter, or a flash burn where the palm touches the metal casing. This is important because there are high definition pictures of his hand, and you can see it's kind of white in the center, where the palm touches the metal casing of the RXL microphone. In your story, the computer tells me, his arm might jump or twitch reflexively, away from the platform. The proximity of the chest microphone to the left carotid artery, the strike zone, creates a horrific secondary effect. This explains why that microphone, I think it actually explains the burn on Charlie's chest and abdomen, because the heavier part of the microphone, which was under his shirt, slipped down. I'm guessing, just guessing for my personal guessing. The proximity of the chest mic to the left carotid artery, the strike zone, creates a horrific secondary effect. The F-R-E-Y, effect via the microphone. Here's where it gets interesting. The wireless mic's electronics will act as an antenna, picking up the laser's pulse and converting it to a high-frequency auditory spike. In the narrative, he tells me, to the audience listening through the house speakers, this would be at Charlie's event, the last thing they hear is a wet, percussive thump, the laser hitting the neck, followed by a shrieking digital howl that cuts to dead silence as the mic's transmitter is fried. You'll remember now, after we heard the sound of what most people thought was a gunshot, the boom, we'll call it, that everybody started screaming. So a lot of this stuff would go unnoticed, unheard, as with, I think, the flash that we may or may not have seen. As of now, most of the video is cut off when Charlie starts to tip out of the chair. So you wouldn't see the flash unless somebody's got the entire video, because YouTube just kind of cuts it out, or people have cut it out. So continuing on, visual cues for your narrative. The blue arc, for a microsecond, a tiny blue-white electric arc might jump from his neck wound to the wireless microphone on his chest. The quote, smoke, and indeed we saw something like that, a thin wisp of acrid chemical smoke will rise from the chest microphone as its lithium battery or its circuitry board vents from the surge. The handheld mic, the RXL microphone in his left hand, might hum with a deep 60-cycle buzz for a second after he falls, even as the character goes limp. Now, here's how the computer suggests I would write this. He was mid-sentence, the RXL microphone firm in his left hand, when the air turned to glass. The crack of the plaid strike was punctuated by a horrific electronic shriek from the wireless mic on his chest. A spark, violet and jagged, jumped from the charred hollow of his neck to the magnetic base of the chest piece. That would be his wireless mic. His left arm jerked as he'd touched a live wire, his fingers locking onto the RXL mic in a death grip as the chair tipped. The last thing the speakers carried was a wet, static, choked gasp before the entire audio rack in the command center blew its fuses. Okay, so here's my next question I asked the computer. And there's just a couple more here, but this is pretty fascinating, you have to admit. Is there, I asked, a warm-up phase to this plaid device, PLAID, from switching it on to firing it? In a professional testing scenario at Fort Huachuca, the quote warm-up of an applied energetics plaid system is less about heating up and more about electrical priming and safety handshaking. Because the USPLs use solid-state fiber optics, they don't need a warm-up like an old vacuum tube TV. I'm old enough to remember those. But they do have a specific multi-stage startup sequence that is perfect for building tension in your story. Now, I'm still trying to figure out what the audio visual guy does. He's in a black hat, black shirt, big beard. I don't know his name. Doesn't really matter. But while the first speaker is asking questions of Charlie, he goes up and under the American, like the A&M, and then the comeback, like the CNO, right around that area. So if you're looking at the stage, it's a little bit to your left, just a little bit on that main table in front of Charlie. And he peeks, and he doesn't peek for very long, as if he's looking for a light. That's why I was asking these questions. So let me continue on here. Where did I leave off? Okay. Stage 1, the cold boot. It's 30 to 60 seconds. when the technician flips the master switch on the remote console. Keep in mind that several people could have this remote, and somebody turns it on. Could be Brian Harpole, could be somebody else. It could be somebody sitting in a car in the parking lot. The sound, you will hear a high-pitched whine of the cooling fans in the 2 shoebox size units. The action, the onboard computer runs a BIT, built-in test bit. It checks the fiber optic cables for microfractures and ensures the cooling system is at the optimal temperature. The visual, on the shoebox, the green, safe LED light flashes slowly. That could be what he was looking for. Maybe not, but just guessing. Stage 2, capacitor charging. This takes 5 to 10 seconds. This is a pretty fast operation. This is the most dangerous and audible phase. Of course, now we've got audience all over at this thing. You can hear it on every video, screaming. People are loving Charlie and hating Charlie, and they're screaming through that amphitheater. This is the most dangerous and audible phase. The weapon needs to store a massive amount of electricity to release it in the quadrillionth of a second. The sound, a rising ultrasonic charging hum, similar to the sound of a professional camera flash charging, but much louder and more industrial. The visual, the status light on the units charges to solid amber. This is the point of no return. I'm assuming that means the machine has to be fired. The system is now hot. This is when the character's RXL microphone and wireless chest mic might start picking up a faint low-frequency buzz or thrum as the capacitors create a local magnetic field. Now, we saw some kind of turbulence or some kind of feedback of some sort. You can kind of barely hear it on most of videos that I've seen. Stage 3, the arming or handshake, it takes 2 seconds. Before the laser can fire, the remote control station must receive a go signal from the safety range software. The action. The system's radar/LiDAR sensors sweep the area to ensure the beam path is clear. That's called the safety fan. The failure point in your story, which is my story, this is where the accident happens. The sensors might misinterpret the character sitting still on the chair as a static backstop or part of the platform giving the green light to fire. Stage 4, final lasing, instantaneous, the vision. The red active LED light flashes for a microsecond. The action. The seed laser fires into the amplifiers, the pulse is compressed, and the plasma filament snaps into existence. The narrative clock for your story, you can use these stages to create a countdown, he's telling me from my book, that the character is oblivious to, and that kind of just goes T minus 60. The character adjusts his wireless chest mic. In the background, the shoeboxes start to whirl. T minus 10 seconds. He grips the RXL microphone in his left hand. A high-pitched drone begins to vibrate the platform beneath his feet. T minus 2 seconds, the amber light turns solid. The audio in the room develops a strange static hiss. T minus 0, the crack occurs. In this case, we were told it was a gunshot. A technical glitch for your fiction. Here's the computer telling me. If you want the accident to feel like a technical failure, you can have the technician mention a pre-fire leak. This is a real phenomenon when the capacitors dump their energy prematurely because of a faulty optical switch. It means that the weapon fired itself during the stage 2 charging phase before the operator has touched the trigger. Would you like to know how the RXL microphone's metal stand or magnetic chest microphone clip might actually attract the plasma filament, causing the beam to curve slightly toward the character's neck. Well, yes, indeed, I would. So here's what I said. Well, yes. Oh, yes, I would. Please do explain that. And here's what the computer says. And you can just judge for yourself if you think this is a possibility of what could have been done to Charlie. Because we know it wasn't a 30-06. Most people are pretty convinced it wasn't a gunshot of any type. In your story, the computer goes on to say, the interaction between the high-tech plaid weapon and the character's equipment creates a phenomenon known as field distortion. While a standard laser travels in a perfectly straight line, a USPL ultra-short pulse laser creates a filament of plasma that is highly sensitive to electromagnetic environment. The plasma attraction, why it hits the neck. Because the USPL ionizes the air, the beam path becomes electrically conductive, essentially a wire made of light and gas. The magnetic attachment on the character's right chest creates a localized magnetic field. As the plasma filament zips past, it can be slightly tugged or steered by this magnetic field toward the character. The RXL microphone, the ground, your character is holding a metal RXL microphone in his left hand. That makes him the best grounding point in the room. The plasma filament wants to find the path of least resistance to the earth. The result, the beam doesn't just hit him, it snaps to him. It might have been aimed at a sensor behind him, but the metal and the magnets in his gear acted like a lightning rod, curving the final inch of the beam's path directly into the soft tissues of his neck. Number 2 is the optical aperture, the eye of the storm. The aperture is the 1 to 2 inch glass lens on the front of the shoebox-sized unit. During the stage 2 charging phase, it wouldn't be dark. The pre-flash glow inside the shoebox, the fiber optic amplifiers, are pumping energy. You would see a spectral flickering violet or deep blue glow behind the glass. It looks like a captured lightning swirling in a jar. As the air directly in front of the lens begins to ionize even before the full shot, it creates a lensing effect. To the character looking down, if he was, the air would look oily or distorted, like the heat over a desert road. The dust trap. If there was any dust in the room, well, we're outside, so I don't think there's a lot of dust, the aperture will start to statically attract it. You would see tiny specks of dust flying toward the lens and vaporizing in tiny blue sparks, a micro-popping sound that serves as a final silent warning. As the microsecond, the magnetic jolt of the chest microphone. As the microsecond of the strike, the microsecond of the strike, the Lorentz force, the massive electromagnetic surge from the USPL causes the magnetic clip. Now, again, the computer thinks he's wearing it opposite of how he was. The magnetic clip on his chest will vibrate so violently it produces a physical kick. This would be the larger box, the microphone. Narrative detail. He might feel a sharp thump on his chest, the magnet reacting. At the same time, at the same amount, his neck is struck. To a witness, it looks like his chest and neck were hit by 2 different invisible hammers at once. The RXL microphone bite Because the left hand is grounded through the RXL microphone, induced current, the EMP doesn't just fry the microphone, it sends a high voltage jolt through the character's arm, the freeze reaction. Instead of dropping the microphone, the electrical current causes his muscles to tetanize or lock up. He would fall off the chair, still clutching the RXL microphone with white-knuckled force. We saw that. Potentially pulling the mic or a mic stand or cable down with him in a tangle of wires. How to describe the glow and the snap? Well, let me just read this because it is kind of fun. If I was writing a book, my computer's helping me. The shoebox on the floor hummed with a predatory energy, its glass eyes swirling with a ghostly violet luminescence. He looked down, mesmerized by the way the air in front of the lens seemed to ripple and tear. He didn't see the emerald green aiming dot climb up his shirt, but he felt the magnet on his chest mic suddenly buzz against his skin. Then the violet glow in the lens collapsed into a single blinding white needle. The beam didn't just fire. It seemed to reach for him, snaking toward the metal in his hand and the magnet on his heart, finding its violent home in the soft curve of his throat. Okay, he writes fun. I asked this then. I'm curious if the magnet and the wireless microphone would get hot. If so, how hot might it get? Because we saw burns on the Charles McClintock Wilson high definition photos. As they're pulling Charlie out toward the SUV, we saw a burn, a pretty serious burn. So let's ask the computer. In your story, the computer says, the wireless microphone in its magnetic clip wouldn't just get warm, they would undergo a violent induction heating event. Because the applied genetics plaid creates a massive electromagnetic pulse, or an EMP, via its plasma filament, any metal or magnetic material in the near field becomes an accidental heating element. Now, here's the breakdown of the temperature and the physical transformation. The magnetic clip flash heating. The magnet is the most reactive part of his gear. The pulse induces eddy currents inside the magnet, causing it to heat up in a fraction of a second. The temperature, it would likely spike to 150 degrees Fahrenheit to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This is hot enough to cause instant second-degree burns, blistering through a thin shirt. Now, keep in mind, this microphone setup is completely opposite, so the actual mic is on his skin, in Charlie's case. The character would feel a searing bite on his chest as at the exact microsecond the neck is struck. The curry point. If the heat is intense enough, the magnet might actually lose its magnetism for a moment and fall off his shirt as he topples from the chair. The wireless microphone internal meltdown. The microphone contains a lithium-ion battery and delicate copper circuitry. The EMP would cook the copper traces in the circuit board, potentially hitting temperatures over 300 degrees Fahrenheit inside the plastic housing. Now, by the way, if the Rode microphone wireless is ABS plastic shatters and turns into a glass-like substance at 210 degrees Fahrenheit. So it gives you an idea. The lithium batteries are extremely sensitive to electrical surges. The pulse could cause the battery to thermal run away. Here's the narrative detail. He's telling me you would see the plastic casing of the microphone warp, bubble, or melt within seconds of the strike. This was obviously happening under Charlie's shirt, so we don't know. It might even emit a hissing jet of white toxic smoke. venting gas, and we do see something like that, and it could be this gas at this point because it all happens at the same time. It's that instantaneous, a quadrisecond. So it's everything happens at once. And so I think because we saw that smoke or steam or something kind of white poofy stuff closer to the wireless mic, everybody thinks it's a wireless mic. But this is telling us it could be just like this. The XL microphone in his left hand, the electric burn. And now here's where it gets interesting. Since he is holding a metal RXL microphone, it acts as a heat sink for the electricity traveling through his arm. The casing might only reach 110 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which feels like a hot cup of coffee, but the electrical arc where his palm touches the metal would be thousands of degrees for a millisecond. The wound, this creates a pitted electrical burn on his palm, a small, charred, white or gray spot where the current jumped from his skin to the metal. That's the metal of the microphone. If you look at those high definition pictures, once he drops the microphone, you can see the palm of his hand is white. Or it could be gray, but it looks very white. It's kind of a streak there. This kind of blew me away. The smell of the heat. In a high-tech mishap like this, the smells are very specific. Ozone, the sharp smell of the laser pulse itself, burning phenolic, the fishy or acrid smell of the microphone's circuit boards melting, vented lithium, a sweet metallic and chemical smell from the battery. Okay, here's a narrative description, how I could write this in my book. But let's listen to what he says, how he describes this. The wireless mic on his chest didn't just fall, it surrendered. The plastic casing bubbled and blackened as the internal battery groaned under the EMP surge. Beneath the fabric of his shirt, the metallic clip, again, this is upside down, had turned into a branding iron. So this would be the mic, not the battery, because he had it upside down. And we did see branding kind of on his chest. So it goes into a branding iron, searing a red-hot crescent into his skin. By the time he hit the floor, a thin, acrid ribbon of white smoke was curling from the ruined device, smelling of scorched copper and dead chemicals. So that is the end of that. And I just find it so fascinating that we have a description of nearly everything that's unanswered about the Charlie Kirk event. I mean, we have a possible reason for the AV guy to quickly lift up the tablecloth when the first speaker was talking. Was he looking for a light? We would have seen one if they had this under there. Now, when you see videos, now that you know what you're looking for, when that tablecloth, when that guy goes over the tablecloth, you can see something kind of the same size, 2 shoeboxes, that 12 inches or 12 by 12 by 10, I think is the, you can't find a picture of this thing. It's classified. I'd tell you, but then I'd have to but my computer told me about this. It's a prototype. Apparently it's a prototype. So I find it really interesting that it answers so many questions, because people that weren't nearby didn't hear a gunshot at all, but they would have been closer to the gun. That doesn't make much sense. Anyway, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this. I found it one of the most fascinating rides I've ever been on. And my husband's getting a little bit jealous because I'm spending so much time asking this guy all these questions. And again, once he found out that I was writing a book, then it changed everything. It wasn't like he was holding anything back. It was very, very helpful. Before, he wasn't writing all this narrative or any of that. But I find it really interesting that that there was so many of the questions that were left unanswered, And it also kind of tells us why the U.S. government freaked out when it came to Fort Huachuca, because the factory there, the company that makes this, is in Tucson. And now we're finding out that maybe Candace or Erica was there, and that some other people that were there, and it doesn't look good. And the thing that struck me was, if this is true, and I'm not glued to it, I'm just telling you what my computer told me, but if this is true, you know what it means? It's kind of like finding the nanothermite, and some of the professors that tried to deny it, but it was there. What nanothermite on 9/11 from the towers told us is that the government was involved. They either let a foreign government in to get the nanothermite because they worked together. And the same thing with the Charlie Kirk thing. Fort Huachuca and this weapon, and if this weapon were used, and it sounds to me like the computer sure thinks it could. Now, before this, I had really described a lot of stuff. I had looked up the table, the type of table. The table was ABS plastic as well. So, but the table was in front of him. So the beam it may have caused some problem with the chair. I'm not quite sure, but we certainly saw a lot of stuff, and we didn't know about the carbonized tissue and blood and all that stuff that would make a black glass look too. So I would like, if you guys like this, make a comment down below. If you really liked it, would you please put it on social media and tag people like you that you think would be interested to hear this? Again, it's not my story. I'd like it to be, but it's not. I'm not going to take it personal. You can get on the comments and tell me I'm fat and old. I don't care. But this is what my computer said. And I really painted the exact pretty much scenario of Charlie Kirk at that event. And the whole time I'm just thinking about Fort Huachuca and why is the government so freaked out about this, and what could it be? It isn't that he got electrocuted. You can get electrocuted without Fort Huachuca. It wasn't about 30-06 for sure. So it's something coming from Fort Huachuca. And one of the things I do know about Fort Huachuca is that they use these type of weapons. And I knew about some of them from some people from the military that helped me look into some 9/11 stuff. And this stuff seems very sci-fi, but it's very, very real. And this computer just laid it out exactly how it could be set up. It's run remotely. We see a couple of the security people within eyeshot of each other signaling. We see Rick Cutler looking over to the guy in the bushes signaling with some kind of hand signal. If you watch this, it all looks like it could easily be this. So please share it with any of the people that you think would be interested in this. And I'm sorry it took so long, but I spent days doing this. So I cut a lot of it out just by kind of tried to get close to where I was wrong. I was wrong on the phantom laser, because once I realized you can't stop the beam, then I thought, well, that's not going to work. Let's keep on digging. And so that's what I did. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Like and share the video. Sign up, and I'll probably look at more stuff, but let's find out what people think, shall we? So please share all this and see what other people think about this. Is it possible? And you guys go ahead and ask your AI about it too.